Hello and welcome to Das Nostalgia Podcast, episode 21. As usual, I'm your host, Anthology, and today I have another very special guest with me. Sir, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mat Bradley-Tschirgi. I'm on Twitter at MATWBT. I do some writing for Laser Time and Battleship Retention. So I write about movies and video games online. And I've been a fan of computer gaming since I turned about 12 years old, I think. So I just had a real fun following your Twitter feed and seeing all the pictures of the old games and some of the videos. And it's nice to see there's still people out there playing the classics, and with websites like Good Old Games, it's easy to get them running on newer machines.
Right. Well, I'm glad to have you here. Well, before we get into our main topic, do you have a recollection of encountering IBM PC or compatible for the first time?
I do. You know, the first time I really had an IBM PC that I spent time with, it was my dad's work computer. He had it at home, and it was a 386, had Windows 3.1, I think it was DOS 5.0, had PC speaker, no sound card. And I would play all sorts of shareware on it. It could play Wolfenstein 3D. It couldn't quite run Doom on it. We also had like Mario Teaches Typing was on it. And,
yes.
So a lot of demos, a lot of shareware. So that was fun. But with PC speaker, you couldn't adjust the volume on that thing.
Right,
so I'd be playing it, and it was out in the living room, very public area of the house, and I'm sure people were, my parents were quite annoyed with the PC speaker squawking through everywhere. But eventually we upgraded to a Packard Bell 48666 with a double speed CD-ROM. I think 8 gigs of RAM, had Windows 3.11 for work groups for some reason, was on it. And I had that machine for several years, and having a sound card, even if it was not a very good one, was a big upgrade from PC speaker. And that's how I got started playing DOS games. Nice.
Very nice. Well, you've reached out to me on Twitter and suggested that we talk about Interplay's 10th anniversary collection, which I wasn't really familiar with, and looking it up, the official title is Interplay's 10-year Anthology Classic Collection, and word anniversary doesn't really figure into the title. It's kind of like in the middle of a box, but yes, it's turned out to be pretty curious sort of CD-ROM collection of 10 Interplay titles from 83 to 93. Is there any kind of a special reason you wanted to talk about this?
Yeah, I think it does a good example of doing, one game per year, and they're games in all sorts of different genres. You have, sort of illustrated text adventure, you have RPGs, you have battle chess, I would say might be the most popular game on this collection. And then you have things like Star Trek 25th Anniversary and Out of This World. So you have different games that are famous for different reasons. And they're not all great games, but I think the presentation on the disc is interesting. It also had demos for a lot of other games as well. And I think the manual is 400 pages or something it had.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool collection. Again, I haven't encountered it before, but I was going through it, and there are certain things that I like about it. First of all, it has its own sort of like the installer interface, right? With a nice sort of intro and a CD track for the installer of every game, which is really weird because what it does when you select the game from the menu, right? It actually copies the files over to your hard drive. It wastes your hard drive so it can play the CD track while it's unpacking the files. But the installer for each not only has a CD track tune for each of the installers, but it also has custom art for each installer and little interviews that you can read while you're copying files, which is funny because you don't think nowadays it's 5 seconds and the game's installed, because they're all the same as the original floppy versions, right? They're not enhanced in any way. So they're each, 4, 5, maybe 7 megabytes, at most, right? And so now it's 2 seconds, but back in the day, if you had a single speed CD-ROM, those would take forever. So you actually had time to read the interviews while you were installing stuff. Pretty cute.
It is, and it's not just that. You could take that CD-ROM, you could put it in a CD player.
Oh, yes.
And listen to it. And they also had tracks of music for games that were not even part of the collection. They had music for Buzz Aldrin's Race into Space, which was some sort of a simulator game.
There was a demo of it on the disc, and I don't actually know if that track is used in the demo. I don't think so. But yeah, like the CD itself, I think has some 20-something tracks. Like I put it, I played it with my XM player, and I don't know how it actually, I think it goes by the label or some such shit. It ID'd all the tracks. And I looked through the list and I was like, this is actually pretty impressive. Impressive stuff. So yeah, I really like the actual presentation of the disc. Fairly unusual for the time to well, I guess it was an anthology collection, but not many people sort of did it that way.
No, you might have had. I recall Sierra at that time did King's Quest and Space Quest collections,
but
they
they're
were just
not as elaborate. They usually would just
they're not. No, they're just all the games on the disc.
Yeah, and, they have like a batch files for installation, and maybe you had an extra, like the King's Quest ones had like the extra text that you could read, but there were also separate programs that you would have to install by yourself and configure by yourself. This thing auto runs, right? There's a whole bunch of folders on the disk. There's a batch file called 10th.bat, and you just run it, and it auto IDs. Well, it actually doesn't auto ID your sound card because it doesn't need it. It goes through the CD-ROM tracks, so it just tells your CD-ROM to play the track for the stuff. So it's really, really cool. And it's a good collection of games as well. Like you said, one per year technically, although if you take their DOS release dates into consideration, it's not exactly that.
Sure.
Because for some of those games, DOS versions arrived a year or so later than their original, like Apple II or C64 versions and stuff like this. Especially, well, for the earlier games at least. So I guess let's talk about them. We should go on the release date, right? From like the
I think so. Yeah. So one of the first ones on there is Mind Shadow, which is a text adventure that Brian Fargo, founder of Interplay, he wrote it, and it's quite crude. It's difficult. It's honestly quite difficult to get into. The graphics are not so good. You play a guy who wakes up on a beach. He does not remember who he is.
Classic.
And he's sort of lost, and then you can. I remember you run into this bird that will start speaking to you at points. The whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense, and although it did ship with like a 400-page manual, it did not have walkthroughs in there,
right?
As you might see in other collections. So that made it very very challenging. But even for this, what's really an unknown text adventure, that they created a unique CD track as the part of the installer package is just completely crazy. And it's nice. I like that they did that, but
there's a nice extra touch put specifically in that collection that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and the game didn't even have music to begin with. So
right. Well, it's a game from 1984. It barely has graphics, and it's one of those games that's like so early. The graphics is in CGA 4-color, right? But it's also one of those super early games, which means it's also supported the composite CGA output. So you could have nice sort of Apple II looking graphics if you had a composite monitor. A technique that's been abandoned like only a couple years later. Well, not a couple, but a few. Like by late 80s, that was done with.
That's right. So that one I think is okay. That's not one of the better ones. The other one too is pretty strange, but it's more imaginative. You have Task Times at Tone Town.
That is a cult classic in a way, right?
Yes, it's sort of this. You can tell it was made in the 1980s. You have people with mohawks. The text in the instruction manual uses a lot of slang, and it also has sort of icons in the side that you can use if you want.
That is very interesting. Let's go through the premise briefly, right, for people who don't know, because it is a bit of a cult classic. So the story is, and that game is actually fairly graphical for its time. It has the animated intro and stuff, and the DOS version came out in '86, and also it has CGI graphics. But if you had a composite output, it would make it look like a lot nicer. So it's like you play as a kid whose grandpa invented a machine that turns dreams into reality, right? And the villain of the game kidnaps your grandpa in order to sort of make his world better by keeping the grandpa asleep the whole time. So he would keep generating like nice things from dreams and stuff, and it's your task is to go and free him. Fairly unique premise. I do like that it has the icons, right? It has, like Mind Shadow is like your sort of typical interactive fiction with pictures. Like in a way, the pictures sort of like, I guess, limited the text output on the screen, right? For those games, it was always nice for an interactive fiction to have a nice descriptive paragraph. Well, when you have 2/3 of the screen filled with the picture, you can't really have that. So usually in those games that like interactive fiction with pictures, the text was kind of limited. So that's so there's a similar problem in Test Times and in Tone Town, where now like half of the screen, a third of the screen is a picture. Then there's the UI with the extra verbs that you can quick access to, and then there's a text output. And it's actually a fairly complicated game. It's really imaginative, really, really crazy. And just like in every game of that time, you can die rather easily. So yeah, I don't know if you have any particular... I didn't play much of both of those games. I always wanted to get into Task Times and Tone Town, but I never really managed to. One day I'll probably play through the entirety of it, just because it's such a it's a kind of a famous cult classic, right? People who love it really love it. I don't know. Do you have any kind of special memory about it?
I remember getting excited with the title screen and with the music they had on the CD, and then the game I just found baffling at the time. That's one I really should play again with a walkthrough. But I have been reading some online about it, and unfortunately, the graphics on the DOS version are not very good. But there were versions of it made for the Amiga and for the Apple IIgs that look much better.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps if you're going to try and play it, those might be the versions to seek out. But I mean, it's nice it's on the package. It's a much more unique game than Mind Shadow.
Yeah, it's just crazier.
Yeah, crazier. Yeah.
And speaking of graphics, if you're going to play the DOS version, then set either get a composite monitor on a real machine or in a real CGA card, or DOSBox emulates composite output, at least in the SVN version, which is what I use to I don't know if you've seen me post like a million screenshot comparisons lately, just because I finally discovered the Force Composite button, so now I can easily switch between the two. Finally, I didn't think of that before. So it makes the game look a lot nicer in a DOS version. But of course, other, especially something like the Amiga, DOS, IBM PC couldn't really compete with the Amiga at the time, that early on. It didn't really, competition really didn't happen for another like 5 years after.
Sure, and I'm thinking more of, when this collection was released in '93, it was DOS games you still had games released on DOS, but it to have a retro DOS compilation from one company is pretty unusual.
Yeah, well, I think it's also fairly early on. I mean, '93, there's already a few CD-ROM titles out at that point. I mean, like some companies started early, like Sierra and stuff like that started like in 1991 and stuff, which they weren't the first either. I mean, the first CD-ROM game for a computer was released in '89, right? But who had the CD-ROM drive in '89? Nobody did. And let's also don't forget, Sierra offered a CD-ROM package that they would sell you, right? With I think it was CD-ROM and maybe sound card and like a game. And I think that was nearly $500 on launch. So, sure. And it's $500 of $1991, so it's quite a sum of money. So yeah, for 1993, I can't really think of that many companies releasing like anthology compilations.
Yes, ahead of its time. So the other one, let's see if we're going in order. The Bard's Tale. The first game. This one's very, very famous.
Mm-hmm.
I would play this a lot. I think I like it more than something like Wizardry, in which the whole thing is just in a dungeon. And yeah, in Bard's Tale there is a dungeon, but you can go to the bar at the beginning. You can walk around the village. It seemed to have a bit more of a personality to it. Of course, you had to map everything out on graph paper to get anywhere.
Well, of course.
And you would spend 20 minutes trying to create the perfect characters with rolling the dice. I get stats of 18 and everything, and then you immediately get killed by the second monster you see. I think that's part of
Yes, well, it's part of the process, part of the fun.
Yes, part of the process, part of the fun. And I think that it's called the Bard's Tale. The Bard is a class you can have, and that makes it quite that's different. It's not the standard, fighter or wizard or thief.
Right, and was known to be, at the time, hardcore RPGs were blooming at that time, right? But Bard's Tale was known as sort of the more lighthearted one. Like slightly humorous here and there. You could play songs, and it had those sort of not exactly, like, it's not hardcore serious, might magic or wizardry kind of thing.
No, and Bard's Tale had something that you see in a few of these other games in the collection, which makes the manual pretty important, and that, I guess, to save on disk space. Not all the text for the game is in the game itself. It will refer you to the instruction manual.
Paragraph
so go to paragraph 17 or go to paragraph.
Which very nicely the CD-ROM also provides in a plain text file for all those games that need it. It actually specifically states that it's in plain text format, so you can easily convert it, to the printable format of your choice.
Right, and that's good because the manual, while being 400 pages for this whole collection, the binding was not so good. So it would sometimes fall apart, and that you have it as a text file. That's a nice reference there.
Mm-hmm.
I even remember, I forget if it's for Bard's Tale, if it's for one of the other games, I would just read the manual and just read the paragraphs in numerical order. And they have some paragraphs that are just complete nonsense that never appear in the game. Where one, it has a description of like, a naked woman is in a sauna and she looks at you and says, "Oh, you're reading the paragraphs out of order." So I think that's a nice touch. They did not need to include some fake paragraphs like that, but they're in there. And the Bard's Tale is lighthearted. I think if you hadn't played one of these older CRPGs before, I don't know if the Bard's Tale might be the best to start with. I think certainly like the original Ultima is an easier game than, say, Bard's Tale.
Yes. But also original Ultima is not as serious and like hardcore as out of the main ones, right? So like if we're talking about, let's say, Might, Magic, Wizardry, and Bard's Tale, out of those three, Bard's Tale is obviously the most approachable. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be very easy for like a current gamer.
No. The Bard's Tale, it's a classic. It's worth trying out. They released Bard's Tale on several different computer systems. It was also on the 8-bit Nintendo. I seem to remember. So, and yeah, it's a fine choice for the collection. They do in this collection. They have games that are a lot of cult favorites, but you also have some licensed games in there as well, as we'll talk about later. And that makes it interesting. It's not like they pick the most obscure games from their catalog that no one's heard of.
Right, yeah. No, those are all very notable sort of titles, successful or not. They're all sort of. I would kind of say all of those titles that we're going to talk about. That whole collection is worth trying out. I don't think we even need to recommend each of those games. Some of them might be harder to get into than others, but they're all of them are worth looking into. Right.
Do you have any memories of Bard's Tale?
The only memory I have of it is that I couldn't play it. I was never big on RPGs back then because I didn't speak any English and I didn't have any manuals. So those two things kind of prevented me from playing just about every RPG that wasn't easier accessible. I got into some sort of dungeon crawlers in the 90s, when things like, Lens of Lore, right, is like really simplified. So that's very easy to get into. And even if some stuff, like Eye of the Beholder and just sort of like later games. But any of those 80s sort of RPGs, apart from Ultima is pretty easy to get to. Like that's sort of the RPG series that I seem to like the most, just because I could play most of the games. They're rather approachable. So none of those old things.
Next in the collection is Wasteland.
Yes, that's a big one.
Definitely. many call this a precursor to Fallout. It certainly has a similar sort of
Yes.
post-nuclear Mad Max sort of setting. And the point of view of the gameplay is different from Bard's Tale. Bard's Tale is first person, as was common with RPGs at the time. But this one, everything is when you move your party around, it's overhead, and then it's first person again when you get into battles.
Yeah.
And that helps give, I think, it makes it feel a bit more like Ultima, I guess, in that way. And as you're exploring the town, but you just get a sense of how barren everything is, and that it has the Mad Max kind of setting makes it really unique. I think the animations and the color is better than in Bard's Tale.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a fairly big step up. I mean, the graphics could be kind of ugly by today's standards, right? Well, they're sort of basic, right? But then you have those, when you get into battles, like everybody has like an animated portrait and stuff. And also the game is big, really open. Maybe not the friendliest game, but certainly I think easier to get into than the Bard's Tale. And also, again, it's fairly humorous at times. It has that sort of a lot of Interplay RPGs have that sort of quality about them, that they're slightly not serious. So, and of course it's a classic, right? Not even a cult classic. I mean, for the time, I guess it was a cult classic, but over the years it kind of grew into a real classic. So yeah, and of course spawned Fallout and more recently Wasteland 2, but that's a whole other thing.
The setting of Wasteland, I recall just as a kid really liking it, and that it was an RPG where your characters could have guns and knives. I think made it fairly unusual.
Right, yeah, it wasn't fantasy based.
That's right. Like everything else was fantasy
because
based.
Everything else was been influenced by D&D, right? So this was a nice sort of standout title.
That's right. I mean, I think I should mention, like, and the way I'm remembering a bit now as we're talking about these games, the way I bought this collection in the first place is I was first familiar with the Interplay through their Super Nintendo games, like Rock and Roll Racing, right, or Blackthorn. Those happen to be Blizzard games. Yep. Interplay published, and then I heard they did computer games, and I'd played as a kid like Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy on the Super Nintendo, and seeing what computer RPGs were like with like Bard's Tale and Wasteland were really quite sort of blew my mind. It was quite different than what I was used to, and certainly a lot more difficult.
Right.
But that didn't make them any less fun. They just sort of had to, just be very patient, and not expect the beginning to be easy. If you play like the old Final Fantasy games, the first town, first quest is super, super easy, and it's supposed to be. But from the Wasteland or Bard's Tale will kick your ass at the beginning, even if you come in prepared. And so sort of finding your perfect mix of characters to survive the initial encounters is a big part of the fun of these games, and Wasteland is no different.
Right. Well, that's cool, yeah. I mean, it's a classic for a reason. Again, the kind of game I've tried playing a few times now, and I'm more into it now, and I've never beat it. And one day I probably should, but yeah, it's the kind of game I couldn't play back then. I'm going to say that quite a few times during this podcast.
Oh, that's fine. So next here, I'm going by the order of the pictures on the box. Dragon Wars, which is a strange game. I read a rumor originally it was going to be Bard's Tale 4, and then they had to change the title to Dragon Wars for some reason.
Something. I remember hearing, it was in the Matt Chat interviews with Rebecca Heinemann, who was a programmer on all those games. And many other Interplay titles and ports. But yes, so something happened. I forget. I'm not gonna try to remember what happened. But yeah, this is essentially another RPG, fantasy RPG, based on the Bard's Tale engine, and was programmed by Rebecca Heinemann and designed by Brian Fargo and Paula Connor, who later became known for designing the Oddworld games.
Okay.
So, and it's actually even more humorous. I don't know much about this game, but I've seen I don't know if anybody of my followers know Richard Goodness, who was on one of my podcasts and a big CRPG fan, and I saw him play it, and some of the enemies are hilarious. Probably the most standout that I've seen They were called the Old Guys, and and it's just it's picture of an old dude, and a description for them says, "Some of these old guys know a thing or two." And yeah, so it's that game. But yeah, it's essentially, from what I understand, I haven't played that game at all, but it's sort of very Bard's Tale like thing.
It is. I never got past the beginning area in this game, despite trying to play it a whole lot. You get at the beginning, you're imprisoned and you have to escape, and it's a very desolate sort of landscape. I don't think your characters even have that many clothes or weapons on them. And I love, above all, I like the cover artwork to this game a lot. It looks a bit like one of those Frank Frazetta type of paintings.
It's Boris Vallejo, isn't it?
Oh, is it Boris Vallejo? Okay. It's a nice piece of work. That's very good. And yeah, the Dragon Wars is not one of my favorites. It's nice that it's on here. I do wonder if they could have picked something else from 1989, but I'm not that familiar with their catalog, because this is the third RPG in the collection.
Yeah, there's a gap. Dragon Wars, the DOS game, actually came out in 1990.
90, okay.
Yeah, and 88 is shared with on DOS at least, with Battle Chess and Wasteland, both, which have different versions come out in different years on different platforms. Like Dragon Wars appeared the year earlier on Apple II and I think C64, right? So that's technically an 89 game. So did Wasteland. I think Wasteland is originally released in 87, but don't quote me on that. Not the DOS version. So I'm only familiar with the DOS dates, but I always assume other platforms. Usually, if it was the case for like in the 80s for the 8-bit computers, that usually happened first.
You had mentioned Battle Chess, which is on this collection, the original version,
mm-hmm.
And yeah, I played this game when I was very young. My dad had pirated a copy from work, and there were copies passed around the office. And I originally played it on a 386 where the loading was very slow, and hearing the PC speaker screams are just painful as the characters were being stabbed. And in Interplays remade Battle Chess several times or throughout the years, but this is just the original disc version, and you can. It's just, this is how I learned how to play chess, was playing Battle Chess. And one thing I noticed playing it now is if you choose the default view, which has the animated pieces, and they animate as they walk, and then they fight when you capture a piece or when one of your pieces gets captured, it's very difficult to see where you're going in some ways, because the characters are so big on screen, and the perspective makes it difficult to see where you're going on the board.
Yeah.
But you can also switch to a default chess mode that's your typical kind of overhead two-dimensional view, and it's actually easier to play that game, although you're missing the whole Battle Chess.
Yeah, the whole point. Yeah, but it's a famous title. I mean, I posted a picture of Battle Chess today, and people went crazy, being like, "I love it. That's how I learned to play chess." Everybody loves Battle Chess. It was also on a variety of platforms, including the NES. And they had quite a few updates throughout the years, and knockoffs as well. So it's a famous concept. But yeah, I mean, it's not. From what I'm hearing, I actually, with all the chess games that I have played on the computer, or let's say taken screenshots of, I don't know how to play chess. So again, I cannot remark on the quality of this game. But I heard that the AI is actually good, especially for the time. Don't know if it's true or not, but most people seem to be satisfied with the AI, which is important in a chess game, of course.
I recall the AI being good. I think if you set it to a higher level, it takes a really long time to think between moves.
Right. I think that was the case in most PC chess games, of which there are a lot that I have found out.
Oh, yes.
A couple years ago, I think I started doing like screenshots. I was like, let me see how many chess games are out there. And there's quite a few famous ones, and I dug up a few forgotten ones, and there's a lot of them. And let me tell you, they like to think, those games.
That's right. They like to think. They also like to load the animation sequences. I mean, Battle Chess, Interplay later reloaded it or remade it as a CD-ROM version that had SVGA graphics.
Right.
and more detailed animation. Battle Chess 2 is Chinese checkers, which is quite strange.
But it has a cool graphical aesthetic.
Yeah.
And it's on VGA.
Yeah, so graphics are a bit better in that one. You had, I think, Battle Chess 4000 was like space themed.
And it was pre-rendered 3D things. So they're kind of ugly, but the animations are really amusing.
But you mentioned some of the Battle Chess knockoffs. You had Terminator 2 chess.
Oh yeah, the capstone game.
Star Wars chess.
Star Wars chess, yeah. There was the, the National Lampoon one.
Oh, that's right.
With the digitized actors on a 3D board that you could rotate. There's a few other ones, I think, as well. But, Battle Chess is where it started.
It is. I especially remember liking the animations when you play, if you capture a piece as a pawn, the pawn is so little he might step on someone's foot and they'll bounce around and fall over and that's how they die. So it's a nice sense of humor.
Yes. Yeah, it's a fun game, I guess, if you know how to play chess. I don't, so not so much fun for me.
Have you played Castles at all? That's one on this collection.
I've heard of Castles. It's a bit of a cult game, but I think its sequels are more sort of popular amongst the fan of the series. So I have touched Castles long time ago, and I've never got far, but I know what kind of game it is. It's a fairly unique game, I guess. Have you played it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I've been playing it the past few weeks. Good Old Games made it available recently. In fact, there's been a lot of Interplay games on Good Old Games. Some of their Star Trek ones as well have been on there. And yeah, Castles, it's quite different from its sequel. This first one, it's literally mainly a castle building simulator, in that it takes a few years of game time to build one big castle. And about every month or so of game time, I think you can set between a historical campaign or a fantasy campaign, but basically you're the king. In these pretty good graphics for the cutscene, someone comes up to you and sort of gives you a choice, and it's like, oh, this guy was caught poaching rabbits on your property. Do you murder him or do you let him get away with it? And then this will affect things later on. It'll affect how much you get attacked. It'll affect who you get attacked by. And the combat is quite limited. It's more limited than something like Command and Conquer or Dune 2.
Right.
You have to go and you can build archers and soldiers, and you're being told, oh, the enemy is approaching from the east, but you're not told where in the east they're approaching from. So you kind of plop down your characters, and then the battle starts, and hopefully you chose wisely. And so yeah, it's very unique. The other one I think is more of a strategy, a political game where there's more sort of wheeling and dealing you can do. In this, it's like you can. It's quite strange when you start the game. You see a menu, and you can pick how many castles you can build at once, or how many castles is in the campaign. So do you want your campaign to be, you have to finish 3 castles to finish the game, or 1 castle, or what have you? And I chose 1 castle by accident, and after a few hours, I beat that scenario, and then it just says "Thank you for playing," and it kicks you back to DOS.
Nice.
So, not uncommon at the time, but this was a pretty okay game. It's not. Yeah, I agree with what you said that Castles 2 is a better one, but I believe you can get Castles and Castles 2 on Good Old Games, which is sort of nice. You can compare the two, and I think it's only like $6. It's not very much. So I had a lot of fun with Castles, although playing it now, I had to look at the manual for an hour to figure out how to play it, because it has no tutorials, which was common at the time. You had to sort of figure, if you didn't have the instruction manual,
right, you're screwed.
You're sort of stuck. Yeah. You're screwed.
Yeah.
A few of these games in the collection did have CD-ROM versions, but you only get the
only get the original floppies, as stated on the box. We actually skipped over a game because DOS version of Castles, was there any? It probably was on different platforms. I'm not sure about Castles. That was not a very famous one, but we skipped over the Lord of the Rings Volume 1. And
yes,
the original release happened in 1990. For that game, and that's a kind of it's kind of an interesting game that time forgot, right? In a way,
it is. I recall the CD-ROM version. The main difference was it had video clips from the Ralph Bakshi cartoon.
Yes, it had the Bakshi animations, and it had one of the issues was addressed in the game that was people's main complaint. You could see the auto map. You could zoom out into the auto map, which did not exist in the original version. So I haven't played this game much either, and they made Volume 2 and updated the original game to the CD-ROM, but I don't know, does Volume 2 wrap up the actual story, or
it does not. No, they were supposed to do Volume 3.
So they never actually made the Return of the King, right? So,
that's right. No, they never did Return of the King.
So I guess it never really did particularly well, but it is a bit of a weird thing because it's an adaptation of the first book of Lord of the Rings, right? Almost in its entirety and fairly close, in a style that's not too different from, let's say, Ultima 6.
That's right.
So you have sort of the party-based goings around, and you control Bilbo and what's the other two's names, whatever. So you start with 3 hobbits, and you go around talking to people, and the battles are turn-based. There are battles where you like fight off wolves and whatnot in the forest and stuff, and you can. But the difference is you actually don't have to stick to the book. The party management and the paths are all up to you, from what I understand. Like, you can deviate from the book quite significantly.
That's right. It's very open-ended. One thing I like about it is that you start in Hobbiton, and there's a whole lot of side quests you can do in Hobbiton if you so desire. And also, because you're hobbits, you don't do very good in combat.
Right.
So you can die very easily, which felt
also
true,
yes,
to the book.
Combat can be avoided lots of times, from what I understand. But the biggest thing is, speaking of combat, is you don't level up and you don't get any experience points. This is essentially kind of like, well, almost like a later Ultima game, but not even that, where it's essentially an adventure game disguised as an RPG. So so the combat isn't really necessary, and it kind of feels shitty that it's in there in the first place, And then there's this huge open maps. It's a very open game, just like the more I think about the Ultima comparison, the more I think it's very fair. Where just those giant open maps, where you just start running around, all over the place. So I can see why it never sort of caught on. I think all things considered, that's a pretty good approach to the Lord of the Rings game, especially if you want to just not base the game in its world like the strategy Lord of the Rings games, right? But actually stick to the story somewhat. It's an interesting approach, but I guess it never really caught on, hence the final part never being made.
Yeah, maybe it's just something about Interplay running out of time with the license or something. There was a really good article on Polygon, I think a year ago, that looks at many of the Lord of the Rings games that were made, and they talk about this one in particular, and they mention how originally it wasn't even supposed to be a Lord of the Rings game.
Really?
But then Interplay got the license, and so they had to make it fit with Lord of the Rings.
Well, it is so weird because it fits really well.
It does. I wouldn't have guessed it had I not.
It must have been either early on in the like, that couldn't have been like a later like rejig of any kind. Like the story is what drives that game and the world. So like I can't see it not being either that, or they had to redo quite a lot of the work. So yeah, like I really don't know. Like I can't picture that game and be like, okay, yeah, if you just take out this and this and this, it could be something else. Like, it's a Lord of the Rings game, very much.
Yes, and Lord of the Rings Volume 2 I've never played. They did not do a CD-ROM version, from what I understand, of Volume 2, just a Volume 1.
Mm-hmm.
So another one on here is Star Trek 25th Anniversary, which is a mixture of an adventure game, but it's also part of a flight sim for some of the action sequences.
Yeah, it's actually the most recent game on that compilation, because the floppy version came out in 1992, And I think the CD-ROM version wouldn't come out till 1994. I'm thinking. So yeah. It's actually a fairly famous game. So you get sort of the episodic like scenarios from Star Trek, where you sort of control the ship as the captain. You know, you get to fly the ship, and then you get to give commands for shields and speed and whatnot, and comms, and shoot ships down or whatever. And you also get the adventure part where you beam down on the planet and get to explore and stuff in adventure. Now, the adventure part of it is not particularly good, and the action parts are kind of annoying. So it's a cool game overall, but the good thing about it, all those issues have been addressed in the sequel. So like a sequel is kind of the same game really, but better designed. Judgment Rights, for which there's a non-interactive trailer on that included in that CD-ROM collection. But yes, I mean, Star Trek 25th Anniversary I think is a fairly well-known DOS game. It's also on GOG, as is Judgment Rights and something else.
Yes. No, 25th Anniversary. It's fun, but yeah, the adventure parts, it gets very picky with where you click. One thing I do like, though, is in each self-contained episode of the game, you can approach it sort of differently, and you get scored at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So if you try to play it more, if you're like less violent, I think you get a higher score. A red shirt tends to go down on the planets with you, and if they die, you get a worse score. And on the CD-ROM version, which is not included in this collection, is really worth checking out, because they got the original cast members to reprise their roles, and that's true of both the 25th Anniversary and Judgment Rights.
Mm-hmm. And I think in Judgment Rights, the voice work is also better quality. Everybody seems a bit more interested, so I guess slightly better directed.
Yeah, William Shatner just seems a bit bored in 25th Anniversary. I don't know what it is, but you're right. In Judgment Rights, it's also, I think, might have been the last time that some of those Star Trek actors got to play those parts.
Quite possibly. I'm not so sure about it. I'm not big on Star Trek, despite every single one of my best friends being a huge Trekkie. Yeah, I'm not an expert, but it very well could be. But yeah, like it's a fine game with even a better, like, refined sequel.
Yeah, the copy protection in Star Trek 25th Anniversary is very annoying. You get your first sort of assignment to go to this planet, and then you click on the galaxy navigation part of the ship. And it's this map of stars and different grids. And there's like 100 different choices, and you have to look in the instruction manual and see exactly which star and which quadrant you're supposed to click on.
Uh-huh.
And it's effective copy protection, because you won't get very far. If you pick an incorrect planet, the Klingons will be there, and you'll be attacked and die immediately, or the Romulans will attack you. So it's a unique way to do copy protection, but it's fairly annoying if you don't have the manual at hand.
Right. All right. But yeah, I mean, it's worth checking out. Most certainly. It's a classic DOS game, for sure.
And the other one on here that I must have skipped over was Out of This World.
Yeah, also known in the rest of the world as Another World. And that, in that collection, I mean, I enjoy these games, and some of them I played more, some of them less. But Another World happens to be one of my favorite games of all time. I adore that game. So Another World is a sort of story-based action platformer. I don't even know what we call those things. Sort of the Prince of Persia knockoffs.
Yes,
I know that cinematic platformers they're called officially, but I have a review on my channel from years, like 6 or 7 years ago. But it's a cinematic platformer made by one Frenchman. Eric Chailly, and the DOS version of it it was originally for an Amiga, but the DOS version of it is a bit more refined. It has extra content that the original Amiga version doesn't have, and just overall it's slightly faster and just as good looking. It's an amazing game, 16 colors only. Those polygonal vector graphics, rotoscope graphics are beautiful. and it has this thing where it's an action platformer. Your reaction time is vital because just about everything kills you, and it's that process where you die, you learn, and you sort of do everything over and over again. But you play as this guy, Professor Lester Knight Chaikin, who drives a Ferrari late at night to some kind of a science facility where he performs a particle acceleration experiment in the middle of the night. Lightning strikes, and he's transported into another world where he's shortly after he survives the initial few screens and local fauna and flora, I guess. He gets sort of shackled and put in a cage with another alien known as Buddy, and not Mark Suber or Mike Aluba or whatever the fuck people like to call him. He's known as Buddy, and you both escape and you sort of fight your way out together against bad aliens and stuff, and it's very devious. It's kind of people always complain that it's super difficult, but honestly, with enough repetition, even like the most annoying part of it, the caves, are fairly easily beatable, and the checkpoints are fairly abundant in the DOS version. You know, if you're not being saved for a while, that means that you're at the part of the game where you can do things in multiple sequences, and you're not doing them right, you know, in the right order. So that's the reason why you're being set back so far in the caves. So that's your sort of, but I love it. It's extremely cinematic, and the first time I finished it, first of all, I will never forget the first time I've seen the intro. I was at my friend's house. He booted it up on his 286, that intro with the car pulling up next. Like, I will never ever, and it also does the quality sound out of it. It pulses this PC speaker to make actual, not beeps and boops, but the actual sounds and music, digital. So it's one of those games, and it looks gorgeous, and it plays beautifully. The controls are fairly good for that sort of a game, and it has so many emotional moments when like the guard grabs you, and then you know you hit a key, and like Lester kicks him in the balls, and you have like a second to like grab the gun, and then whatever happens at the end. I nearly cried the first time I got to the end. You know, it's very sort of. You can clearly tell it's a French auteur game, right? It's very unusual, even for the time. I mean, let's you know, the computer game industry at the time was full of experimentation. There were really no set formats. But even for the time, that game really stands out. It's clearly inspired by Prince of Persia, right?
Yes.
But it takes that concept and makes it even more cinematic and less puzzly. And I absolutely adore it. I collect and play every version. I have currently played, I think, every single version, every single port of Another World for every platform. But I do my favorite, my preferred version is the DOS version.
The opening cinematic is nice because it takes its time. You know, he's just driving his car. He gets a can of soda from the machine at work. He's sitting down at the computer. There's no reason they had to animate all this stuff, but they did.
Yeah.
And then when you're transported into the other dimension, you're immediately underwater, and if you don't swim straight up, these tentacles come and pull you down.
And if you swim up and you stand in one spot, they still come out of the water and grab you.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. The beginning almost reminds me a little bit of Dragon's Lair, in that you're in such danger in the beginning, you have to know exactly what to do, running left, running right. But after that, up to the point where you get captured, and you escape, and you get the gun, and you get the energy shield.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can sort of take more of your time and be a bit more tactical.
It's a bit more puzzly and explorer. Although some action bits are fairly hairy, like when you have two guards on both of your sides that are closing in, and you really have to know. Another thing that I love about it, the game is controlled by only 5 keys, right? It's the arrow keys and enter or space or insert, whichever you want to use for your action button. It's essentially designed for a joystick. So like. You get everything like to to hit something or to kick something, it's a button. If you hold the button and press in the direction, you run, and then your gun has short burst, will fire a weapon, but if you hold the button, you'll make a shield and stuff. So it's really fantastically designed. To think it's one guy did all the work but the sound and music. It's I mean, it took him like 2 years, but it's absolutely, and the game is fairly short. If you know what to do, like I can beat this game with my eyes closed nowadays, which a lot of people were like, apparently to this day people find this game really hard. Honestly, if you played it 100 times, you're going to just finish it in like 20 minutes and be done with it. but it's incredibly cinematic and really emotional. Like there's some really like fantastic turns, like when you and Buddy have to split up. Buddy saves you, sort of being captured himself, and then you sort of save him, and then whatever, everything that happens at the end, like all of that is a really, really cool experience. I love that game.
And the graphics are done in such a way, I think that it still holds up today. It's stylized enough.
Yes, it's pretty timeless, which is good, because for the new editions they didn't change the graphics for the characters. They just redrew the backgrounds badly, but you can turn on the original polygonal. It looks like a modern day vector game. I mean, it is a vector game. So yeah, and to think like 16 colors in every one of those backgrounds. I mean, it's artistically, it's beautiful. It's absolutely fantastic. Such an incredible use of color and imagery. And there's this moment, right, when you break free, and if you just take the elevator to the top floor and go next to the window, all it is just like this scrolling thing of you looking at the world, at the fortress, through the bars. Just pans up and it just goes, like all of it is very ominous. It's not a happy game, but it really does give you that sense of adventure. In a way, I actually always say that Another World did for platformers what Half-Life repeated that. That's what Half-Life did for first-person shooters. It took that sort of formula of you being the player, and things unfolding around you. Because Another World has cutscenes, right? But it also has shit happening as you play. Like when you break out, there's some kind of a prison break going on at the same time. As soon as you break out,
right.
And you see people running like closer to the screen, and you see people shooting behind and in front of you. There's always, it actually does the way it does world building is great. Like I've said it a million times. I can talk about Another World for hours and hours. I love it so much. It's an incredible game.
And I remember how happy I was when I solved this first one of the early puzzles in the game, which is pretty simple looking back on it.
Mm-hmm.
But you get captured at the beginning and you're in the cage,
mm-hmm.
and that you have to, like as you said, you just have the arrow keys and the space bar. And you're sort of stuck in the cage. At first you think you can't do anything, but if you push left and right,
yeah, you start rocking.
You can rock back and forth, and you keep on increasing that until the chain breaks and it falls on top of the guard.
Of the guard who was like shooting in the air previously, telling you to stop. He's like Uchenga. And like he's like and then Buddy shows utters his famous, Matsuba. And you pick up the gun and you're fucking off to go, and from there it gets really, really hectic. I really love that game, and it's great that Eric kept the rights to it. And well, first of all, it's like on every platform ever, with Rebecca Heineman actually handling the ports for 16-bit consoles. That were done on the cheap and presented quite a significant technical challenge, because she had to port that polygonal vector engine to those consoles, and she did. She gave quite a few interviews of how challenging it was, because Interplay wouldn't shell out for like extra chips to make the process faster or memory bigger, so she had to work with quite a few constraints on those ports, and then but nowadays the rights are reverted back to Eric, or maybe he always had them, so you can now buy the 15th and 20th anniversary edition for just about every platform, including a phone. Like I have it on my Android.
Oh wow!
It was ported by .emo, and you would think that the actual touch interface for that game is actually fairly nice. the way it's done. Like you can double tap on one side to run, and you just tap the corner to sort of do the action. It's and some sections have been simplified because of that, but it's actually a fun game to play on the go. And yeah, it's available on everything, on the 3DS, on Windows, on Mac, on Linux. It's everywhere.
Yeah, and I think the controls in that game are simple enough where they probably do control pretty good on a touch phone.
Yeah, well, the controls, usually when games like this are ported, you get like a virtual joystick of some kind, and it's usually terrible bullshit.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not the case. Actually, it has its own sort of control. You double tap to run to one side. If you need to jump all of a sudden, you just sort of swipe up, and he jumps. So it's easier to sort of, because it has some intense action bits in the game, so it needed to be a lot more responsive than just a virtual joystick. And it comes, all those 15th and 20th anniversary edition come with and on all platforms as well. You can switch between sort of updated modern graphics and the original graphics on the fly.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Well, I also mentioned the CD-ROM had demos for several other Interplay games, and they're quite varied. I mean, some of it is stuff related to what the 10 main games are. You have a demo for the Battle Chess CD-ROM version.
Yeah, I looked it up. It's actually a separate demo set that they pushed on every CD that came out at that time.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. It's exactly the same, because when I got I just took a screenshot from Battle Chess Enhanced CD-ROM version, and it's the same folder, it's separate executable to run it, and it's that same set of demos.
Well, let's see. They had a demo on here for Alone in the Dark.
Yes, which is really weird. I've never seen that before. That demo is one room that you cannot leave. It's just the attic, and you can't leave it. There is no end. As far as I could tell, there was no end screen or whatever. And the zombie and the sort of the saber-toothed bird get spawned in indefinitely. That's all there is. Kind of weird.
I guess more of a technical demo. I mean, at the time, Alone in the Dark was very impressive, but trying to go back to that game now is nearly impossible.
I play it like every year. I can finish it with my eyes closed. I love that game. Another one of my favorite games of all time. It might be a bit clunky today, but I still think it's very rewarding.
Yeah, and I think the music of that one would scare me as a kid.
Oh yeah,
just the beginning cinematic. You have the car going towards the house
with a creepy zombie hand out the window.
Creepy zombie hand out the window. I can just picture the music and right now, and yeah, it's pretty good. So yeah, Interplay 10-year anthology is it's a very interesting collection. I did some research and I was a bit surprised. They also came out with an Interplay 15-year anthology.
Yep.
And they also came out with the Anthology Volume 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they used to be a really huge, one of the major computer game publishers. And they're still around. I see on Steam they came out with another version of Battle Chess not so long ago.
Really?
And yeah, let me pull this up. It's on their website, Games and Development. It's called Battle Chess Game of Kings. It was on early access, but it had a full release as of June 2015. And Interplay recently did a Kickstarter for a Descent game. That I guess they're working on a new one of those. So yeah, it's from Boogerman to Earthworm Jim and what have you. They did a lot of games over the years, but this 10-year anthology I think is a good way to check out some of their classics. And it's nice that you have some adventure games, some RPGs. Castles is sort of a strategy game, and then Out of This World is more of an action game. It's a good mixture. So even if you don't like one kind of a game, you'll probably find something on this collection that would appeal to you, I think.
Yeah. Well, no, absolutely. I will check out the other collections for sure. I hope the level of presentation is just as good as the 10th anniversary, because I was really impressed.
Yeah, it was way more than they probably should have done. I think, I don't know. Like, I don't know if the average person might have noticed everything that they did, and that even the concept in 1993 of having a game where you could put the game in your CD player and listen to music. was pretty unusual.
Extra tracks were fairly nice. But although because of that, I don't know if I mentioned this in the beginning of the podcast. I don't remember what any happens. But when you pick those installers, the reason it shows you the art for so long is because it's copying the files to your hard drive, the installer, so it can run the installer while it's playing the music. So at the time, probably not a very nice move, but yeah. It's still cool to have those things nonetheless, especially the interviews. I mean, how many things at the time came from gaming companies that had, anything relating to actually making of a game. That was really rare.
Sure, I mean the closest thing I can think of is what Sierra would have. You might have a picture of, this is Al Lowe and this guy made the game.
Right.
But they certainly wouldn't have an interview with him as part of the...
Well, Sierra, I mean, they did Sierra had the whole Sierra
sure,
call.
Their
so there was the Interaction magazine, and in the King's Quest collection, there's actually a significant thing. There were like separate things with the King's Quest trivia, and it had plenty of interviews with Roberta Williams, and that actually shows pictures of Windows 3.1 port of King's Quest 1 and 2. Which I don't think actually exists, at least not on that collection, and I've never seen it. So if anybody is aware of Windows 3.1 port of AGI engine, let me know in comments. But yeah, again, aside from Sierra that sort of cultivated that their own sort of company name brand, you didn't really know much about game development. From magazines maybe, but not like included with the actual games. And the 10th year anthology actually offered you interviews for every single one of the games in the collection.
Yes, and that it also came with a 400-page printed manual for all these old games was really nice, and that was something that was more common at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But they could have just had it as a text file, and they went to the expense of the whole printed out book, which is nice. I used to have that on my bookshelf for years until it fell apart.
Aww.
So nice, very nice memories there. But yeah, this has been fun talking about these games. I haven't
absolutely
thought about them in a while.
Yeah, this was great. Well, thanks for being here, sir. If people want to find you online, what can they do?
Yeah, so on Twitter, look for @MATWBT, and I write on lasertimepodcast.com and battleshippretension.com, so you can search for my name, Mat Bradley-Tschirgi, on there, but good luck trying to spell that name. So there you go.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much, sir, for being here, and to everyone who's listening, thank you for listening, and if you have a topic for this podcast that you can talk about for an hour or two, find me on Twitter @DasNostalgic and let me know that you'd like to be a guest. And this has been fun, and hopefully we'll see each other again on another episode of Das Nostalgia Podcast. Goodbye, and remember your video game history.